Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman. Our next guest up is our ace reporter, Marc Z. Marc Z Legal Staffing. Marc, how are you?
Good, John. Great to be here. Great to see you, and happy spring.
Happy spring. Give us a Marc Z moment. Do you want to talk about requirements, things to think about in the hopefully the waning days of a pandemic, and what employers and employees need to think about?
Absolutely. So, John, what the whole area that is not talked about, particularly during the pandemic, is the hiring process in a time where a lot of the employees and the employers are remote. And so what's happening is there's a delay in information reaching people. Even though we have emails, even though you can have postings, a lot of times as people are trying to balance their work and home jobs and when they can get things done, it's very difficult to keep information updated. On the employee side, if you're looking for a new opportunity, you need to keep your resume updated. You need to keep your profiles updated, whether it's in LinkedIn or any other medium. So that way, when you're being considered and employers are looking at your profiles on different mediums, everything is current.
That's great advice. I would imagine a lot of people struggle with keeping all channels updated these days.
Correct. Oh, absolutely. It's constant, especially as your responsibilities are changing, particularly, for example, attorneys. They're constantly learning different things. They're constantly being exposed to different areas. If you're in litigation, all of a sudden you're doing IP litigation, intellectual property litigation, besides construction litigation, or you're doing business dispute litigation now that you didn't do before. And that makes you more valuable to certain firms that you weren't valuable before, because even though you had a great background, you weren't qualified to practice in certain areas. So same thing, that if employers want to make sure they have talent, there are people that are constantly checking in terms of status of positions, whether those positions are still open, if they're closed, and it just getting the information out there where somebody who's considering different opportunities and needs to make decisions on other opportunities will be updated currently, not moments ago or not a week ago. You really need to be current.
So I would imagine that another thing, you talk about job responsibilities, job descriptions. I imagine one of the things that some employees are struggling with are workload, getting a gauge as to how much people have on their plates, how busy are they. It's easy to say, well, you're in front of a screen for 9 or 10 hours a day, but to your point, different people have different skill sets or at least capacities when it comes to using technology. And I imagine in some environments, and perhaps in the legal sphere, it's very hard to get a gauge on how much work people have on their plates, because you're not able to be over their shoulder and get a sense of what are you working on, what does your desk look like, what's your backlog. So are you seeing that employers need to update and look at job descriptions and look at this bandwidth and capabilities that people have, and trying to judge balance of head count and things of that nature?
Right. What employers are doing are they're looking at deliverable times. So what they're doing is they're talking to employees, especially remote employees, for example, associates or law firms or mid-level managers with expectations, and they're giving them deliverable deadlines and saying, we need this work done by this time. What are your expectations? And here are our expectations. So more and more of those conversations are happening. So everybody's in sync, because you're right. It's happening is that employees were getting frustrated by deadlines, artificial deadlines that really weren't matching what they're able to do. Because certain employees, on one hand, it's now a 24/7 culture on weekends and nights. On the other hand, a lot of employees are balancing families. Now, what's happening finally are a lot of Their children are going back to school. Schools are reopening. So a lot of parents who had demanding jobs were balancing homeschooling, and we're balancing the Zooms for education, and we're balancing their own jobs. That's going to get better in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and that should ease some of the stress. And then it's coming up with true deliverable deadlines, as well as boundaries for when work stops and family time or personal time stops or starts.
So it seems to me that there's a lot to unpack there for employers. One, figuring out what is my strategy for getting people back in the office if that's going to happen. Two, decisions. I know a lot of companies are going through that decision-making process in terms of, if they're up for lease renewals, looking out into the future, what it might look like. How much space is appropriate. Office environments that have bullpens. People working on top of one another, are there requirements? So if executive committees or senior leadership is not strategizing and huddling and talking about this stuff, they may be caught not being progressive enough for when their employees come back. I think there's a lot of people that we haven't talked about recently, but there's a lot of people that really have been isolated for the course of a year, have stayed home predominantly and haven't been engaged with people face to face. And I think a lot of those people are going to be in for, I don't want to call it a rude awakening, but it's essentially like they're going to be freaked out. It's like, I'm going to get on the T and go into work. It's not going to happen. And so, we're going to face that. And then once they arrive at work, what's the environment like? I know in my own particular instance, my wife and I have not been eating in restaurants, but we have been doing takeout. And sometimes we'll like show up at a place and she'll say, you go in, I'm not going in. And I'll go in and I'll feel like, there's people here. It's weird, there's people without masks on, eating and drinking. It's like, just give me my food and let me out of here.
I know.
And so I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of shock that employers are going to be in for, and employees, as we get back to a more normal environment, because, the habits, don't die off very quickly. And I think in particular in this area where there are people who have been more conservative, perhaps, and I know some folks who have traveled down to Florida and they're like, it's open season. It almost looks like there's been no pandemic in some parts. So I think that's going to be a major adjustment on both sides. I think you're going to have a lot of employees who depend on public transit and take the T one day and the next day they call out and they're like, I'm not coming to work. It's not happening.
Right.
And so that's going to be a juggling act, I think, for people to figure out how to make that work. So are you finding that candidates that you're talking to that are in the market, in the hunt, are looking for specifics when it comes to remote, hybrid, in person, and
Yes.
and are they able to are they able to create those demands and align them with what organizations are looking for?
I think, it's in the now and it's in the future. That's what you have to look at in the eyes of the employer and the candidate. For the employer, they're saying, here's what we're doing right now. You can come in 1 or 2 days a week voluntarily, but it's a good thing if you come in because we need you to align with the people that you're working with. Some employers, especially law firms, we have a lot of individual contributors. They're saying you can work remotely. It's voluntary right now. A lot of attorneys, especially the senior attorneys, like coming in, whereas the junior attorneys and other employees want to work totally remotely. But that is a good point when it comes time for looking for a job, because we're doing some searches and candidates are saying, we don't want to come in right now. And certain employers want them to come in because they need, for the way that office is set up and the clients that they have, the person to come in. And so we'll lose a good candidate pool for those positions, and the employers just will then not have the staff or not have the background of the candidate. The problem is a lot of the firms don't know where things are on future decisions. So when candidates are saying, can you tell me where things will be once things get back to, quote, normal, employers are saying, look, we'll work with you as far as flexibility right now. We just don't know yet. And so that's where the uncertainty on both sides creates some anxiety in terms of moving forward on positions.
Well, that's certainly an understatement, Mark. We are living in uncertain times, no doubt about that. And, that's what makes guys like you so valuable to your clients. You can vet through a lot of this stuff that they say, I don't want to spend the time figuring all that out. You figure it out with the candidate. You
We're
find the
trying.
people that meet our profile. So good stuff. Mark, this has been a Mark Z moment on Radio Entrepreneurs. Mark, how do people get in touch with you if they want to speak with you?
Well, thanks, John. First of all, just Google Marc Z, M-A-R-C, and the letter Z will come right up, or marczlegal.com, MARCZLEGAL.com, and 617-338-1300.
Great stuff. And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.